Good afternoon from Paris and welcome to the headquarters of the International Energy Agency. It's my pleasure to welcome you here for the launch of the second edition of the IEA's World Energy Employment Report. My name is Brian Motherway and I'm the head of the IEA's Office of Energy Efficiency and Inclusive Transitions. This is a newly created office of the IEA where we're strengthening our work on issues related to clean energy transitions such as social inclusion, equality and of course jobs and skills, which is why it gives me great pleasure to be here with my colleagues who are the authors and leaders of our work on analysing issues related to jobs and employment that you're going to hear from shortly that are so pertinent to our clean energy transitions around the world today. So you're going to hear very shortly from my colleague Lara Coetzee, who's the IEA's Director of Sustainability, Technology and Outlooks at the IEA, who oversees our work on tracking energy employment across the world. And then you'll hear from Daniel Wetzel, my colleague who is the report lead author, to outline some of the key findings of today's important new report. We'll then hear from a few perspectives from different parts of the world on some of the key issues that are emerging from the report in relation to jobs and skills in the energy sector. After that, if we have time, we want to hear from you. So we want to hear your questions to all of the participants today. So you're free to submit your questions to the live stream comments section or indeed to email us directly at weo.weo@iea.org. So do please start sending your questions now and we'll take as many as we have time for later on. So without further ado, let me go straight away to my colleague Lara Coetzee. Lara, please.
Thank you very much, Brian, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone. As Brian Motherway just mentioned, here at the IEA, we are tracking what's happening in terms of clean energy transitions around the world. So when we look at investment, for example, we clearly see that the new energy economy is emerging, with investments in clean energy having grown 40% over the past couple of years. When we look at technologies and deployment of clean energy technologies, we see tremendous growth of electric vehicles, of heat pumps, of solar. But the glue that takes everything together for a successful transition is not only investments, is not only technologies, is people. And in particular, the workers that are really, in a way, the unsung heroes of this clean energy transition. So a couple of years ago, when we were putting together all our tracking efforts, we started looking at the data around the world on clean energy and on the energy sector at large. And what we found is that comprehensive data sets were actually difficult to find. So that's why we started a new effort to create a database that collects across all the energy sector fuels and technologies, across countries and across different parts of the value chains, takes a snapshot of what is the situation today for energy sector employments and tries to go back to understand the evolution and track the evolution of the employment as the energy transition gets along. So this is now available. This is what we are launching today. You will find all this data in the World Energy Employment Report, validated across not only hundreds of data of national labor statistics numbers, but also with a lot of companies around the world and many of the partners that are with us today. So what do we find? What are the key findings of this report? First of all, if we go back to 2019 and we look at what has happened in terms of employment across the global economy, today the number of employees is actually smaller than in 2019. While this is true for the global economy, energy is actually a bright spot. And in particular, clean energy is a bright spot. Why? Because clean energy is actually employing today 5 million more jobs, 5 million more workers than in 2019. This actually means that the promises of new clean energy jobs is actually materializing, and we are measuring it today in a very, very substantial manner. So in 2022, clean energy is employing around the world 35 million workers. This is 10% more than fossil fuels. Around the year 2021, actually, globally, clean energy started employing more people than the fossil fuel industry. This is true in many, many geographies around the world, including the largest energy consumers, China, the United States, the European Union. There remains parts of the world where, of course, fossil fuel employs still very significant amount of people. This may be, for example, in oil and gas in the Middle East, in Russia, in the Caspian, and in certainly specific provinces with coal communities. Which parts of the clean energy transitions have contributed the most to this growth? There are 5 buckets: is solar, wind, heat pumps, electric vehicles and their batteries, and importantly, going upstream, critical minerals. Of course, looking at the numbers of jobs is critically important, but doesn't give the full picture. So what we did, we went to companies and asked them what was the situation in the job market, the skills that they were requiring, how they were perceiving the jobs and employment situation in their own sectors. We went to over 160 companies, and importantly, what our survey has found is that skilled worker has been mentioned as one of the top barrier for those companies in expanding their operations today. Why is that? First of all, we find that the energy sector itself requires more skilled labor than the average economy. So the energy sector requires 36% of energy jobs that are categorized as highly skilled. The average economy only 27%. How did the company manage to navigate this difficulty? They started actually increasing wages. So what we find is that for similar occupation, the energy sector today is paying on average in clean energy 15% more than the correspondent occupation in the overall economy. Take the example of solar PV. A solar PV roofer can actually have up to 40% higher salary than an equivalent roofer. Another critical point that we looked is the pipeline of skills. So are we preparing the next generation of workers? And we looked whether are we graduating enough people that would need to fill the jobs of the future? Are we conferring enough vocational qualifications to have the electricians, the welders, the construction workers that are needed for the clean energy transition? Unfortunately, the answer to this question is currently no. If we look at Europe and the US, the number of vocational qualifications has flatlined. In China, it has actually contracted. And if we want to be on track for a pathway that is compatible with 1.5 degrees, we would need to see the number of those conferrals increase about 8% a year. So this is for us an area that requires further attention from policymakers, looking at really anticipating this potential job growth and the specific skills required for the clean energy transition. Here, I would like to add 2 points. One on the diversity of the energy workforce. Currently, the energy workforce is, if you look at gender, for example, is much less diverse than the global economy. There are only 15% of women that are employed in the energy sector. So looking upstream, so looking at the STEMs part and the vocational training, an effort in having more women in those will certainly help also diversify more the energy sector. The second point is about the regional variation, and we were asking ourselves whether do we need every region in the world to really be focusing on pushing more those degrees, those vocational training, and the answer is yes, because what we find is that around 60% of energy jobs cannot be offshored. In put in simple terms, it means that there is really a very strong importance of cultivating strong domestic workforces to ensure the transition. The final point before I pass the floor to Dan Wetzel is about fossil fuel jobs. What we find is actually that today there are less people working in the fossil fuel industry at large than in 2019, with in particular coal having contracted. A large portion of that, we actually find that is around 50% of the reason, is due to automation. And when we look into the future with our scenarios, there is one consistent message across all of the scenarios. We're seeing the clean energy labor force increasing very, very significantly, and the workforce employed in fossil fuels with more jobs at risk going forward. The size of these varies across scenarios, but the direction of travel is clear. In particular, if we want to be on track for a scenario that is consistent with 1.5 degrees, the number of people working in clean energy in 2030 would be twice as much that of today. So we would be able to create over 30 million new jobs. Of course, this is daunting in a way, but it's also a huge opportunity. Several millions of those actually could be coming from retraining of existing fossil fuel jobs. Take the example of oil and gas, bioenergy processing, CCS, offshore wind, hydrogen, geothermal are all a type of sectors that require skill sets that we find today in oil and gas. Very clearly, we will need to focus a lot of attention on specific communities and workers, especially that are reliant on coal. Brian Matherwell has been leading a huge amount of work and consultations, in particular in relation with the Clean Energy Labour Council, really bringing forward lessons from communities that have been impacted and what are best practices for all workers to navigate this transition together in the best way possible. I will now pass the floor to Dan Wetzel, thanking him and the team that has worked with him, in particular Bruno Idini, Kelly Andrews, Rebecca Raff, Marco Baroni, and Nick Johnston, for thanking them for having provided all of us with an incredible resource that will help policymakers around the world, we hope, navigate the transition better.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lara. And I have the privilege now of taking you through some of the key findings. And this year's report really focused on the evolutions of the clean energy workforce during a particularly turbulent period, both for labor markets by and large, and also within the world of energy. So like many portions of the global economy, we saw that energy employment fell in 2020 as a result of many of the lockdowns during COVID-19. And while some of those jobs came back over the course of the year, we did see that fossil fuel jobs in particular remained low as a result of layoffs prompted by record low prices in global markets there. We saw clean energy jobs stabilize during that period, in part with thanks to a number of clean energy investment support packages mobilized by governments. And what we see going forward is that as that government support increased, both because of in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the global energy crisis, we see about 1.4 trillion tracked by the IEA in terms of clean energy investment support materializing since the pandemic. And this has really led to growth in clean energy investment, and also accordingly growth in clean energy jobs. In addition to just having more people installing these projects and manufacturing these pieces of technology, we also see that clean energy firms are building up their workforce in anticipation of future growth. Conversely, when we look at fossil fuels, we see a more tepid recovery from the depths of the pandemic. And in part, this is due to the changing outlook for many fossil fuels. In October, our latest World Energy Outlook came out heralding that within this decade, we are set to see, under today's policies, a peak in all key fossil fuel demand. And so accordingly, we see a more modest rebound in fossil fuels, with natural gas being the one segment where employment is higher than it was in 2019 today as a result of a proliferation of LNG projects. So as Lara said, this means that around 2021, we saw clean energy employment overtake the employment in fossil fuels. So over that time period, we saw around 4.5 million jobs added in clean energy. and fossil fuels remained around 1.3 million below pre-pandemic levels. But when looking at this in more detail, and our report goes sector by sector and understands the different trends in each technology and by region and parts of the supply chain, what we see is when we double click on this, there's a lot of other things going on that are shaping these trends. As Lara said, there are 5 key technologies that contributed around 50% of the job growth we've seen since 2019. These are EVs and batteries, solar PV, wind, heat pumps, and critical minerals. Many clean energy projects also are very focused in the construction and manufacturing portions of the energy value chain. And this is a bit of a pivot from what we've seen historically in energy, where we see a lot of employment in utilities and extractive industries. So accordingly, with this same growth, we see the bulk of this growth, over half, coming from manufacturing and construction segments, where we've seen the declines concentrated in extractive industries, with around 700K of those job losses being in coal. And while we see virtually all regions seeing a growth in clean energy employment over this time horizon, certain regions have rebalanced more than others, and China is really the leader on this front, with 2 million jobs in clean energy growing since 2019 and around 600K in losses concentrated in coal mining and coal power sector. And this, I think, is the scale of this rebalancing and how much China is leaning into these clean energy industries in the last few years is quite remarkable. What we've seen is in 2019, just over 50% of China's workforce was employed in clean energy sectors, and today that number is pushing up towards 60%. So this has been a massive rebalancing and is a big shift in the way energy employment is, and the composition of that energy employment globally. Now, as we said, clean energy is already a major employer today, but even just looking at these 5 fast-growing segments, there's about 9 million workers in these sectors today, and this is going to grow to around 15 million in 2030 when taking into consideration today's policies and the expected outgrowth of clean energy supply chains. And this, to put in a sense of scale, is more than the current oil and gas workforce today, which sits at around 12 million. So these are really becoming sizable industries that are of note and consideration when thinking about broader labor policies and the impacts there. But as Lara said, one of the big concerns that many companies raised in a survey we conducted, which reached around 160 global energy companies, they were signaling, by and large, almost I think 90% of them were saying that the ability to hire the skilled labor needed to ramp up their industries was a major bottleneck. And we really dedicated a lot in this year's report to focusing and understanding what the drivers were of some of those bottlenecks and how to address those. So going and clicking into this a little bit more, as Lara indicated, energy has a much higher skilled profile than the broader economy. So the energy sector requires around 36% of workers in these high-skilled positions according to the ILO's classification, with around a quarter in the economy-wide average. When looking at a fast growth scenario for these sectors on a 1.5 degree scenario, we see that the demand for high skilled positions like engineers, managers, and technicians would grow between 6 and 8% across major economies. But then looking at the degrees required to fill these positions in engineering, science, mathematics, management, related to energy, we see that these are growing not fast enough. So yes, they are on the rise today, but not fast enough. And I think linking back to what Lara said about the diversity component as well, is that we see, although an increasing number of women are going into STEM degrees in the US and India notably, and other geographies like the EU, these have flatlined around 15% for the last decade. So in terms of the diversity component of this is also a concern. But really, then if we shift our attention to these medium-skilled positions where the bulk of energy employment sits today, the growth is higher there. But then when looking at the conferral of certifications that are going to people and occupations needed for the transition, and this is electricians, this is welders, this is construction workers specific to energy, we see that the conferral of these vocational degrees has flatlined in the US and the EU and has fallen rapidly in China. And for a sense of scale in China's repositioning here, at the turn of the century, 60% of high school students were headed into vocational trades after graduation. This is down to 35% today. So this has really been a big pivot, and this is one of the key watchwords that the IEA is raising in this report, signaling that governments, industry, and educators need to come together and identify what are the certifications and skills needed to be able to address some of these bottlenecks. one of the ways in which energy is attracting some more people to these degrees and also into the energy industry is offering higher wages. When we looked across a host of different occupations, I think we looked at around 300 different occupations and the wages associated with those, we see across the board that energy specializations mean that they are able to earn higher wages on average than the economy-wide average for the same occupation, around 15% on average. What is driving this additional wage premium? There's a few factors here. First, any form of specialization incurs a higher wage or attracts a higher wage, but energy also is in a position to offer higher wages to attract the top talent. And then also, as Lara said, the skill shortages that we're currently seeing in many of these occupations is prompting energy to raise their wages to remain competitive and attract the top talent. In that same survey of different companies, 60% of them reported having raised their wages significantly over the last 3 years, with most of them reporting that they raised them faster than inflation. And we saw this particularly also in the US, where data shows that energy wages rose 7.5% in 2022, where the economy-wide wages rose only 1.5%, and this increase was faster than inflation. So in some ways, these higher wages on offer are a heartening sign of the energy industry mobilizing to bring in the needed talent to make sure the transition is not slowed. But I just wanted to end with a sense of scale of this transition. So looking even under today's policies and the current pipeline for projects, we see about 8 million more jobs coming online by 2030 in clean energy sectors. And as Lara said, coming up to our net zero scenario and that faster transition, we're seeing 30 million jobs, 30 million more people needing to work in clean energy sectors to be able to support those industries and support that growth. Now, of course, this faster transition we recognize implies a greater losses in fossil fuel sectors. And of those jobs at risk, we see around 13 million jobs at risk in the 1.5 degree scenario that the IEA explores. Now, many of these jobs would naturally transfer into the green bar up top. This includes people who are currently manufacturing gasoline cars today, moving over to electric vehicles, people manufacturing and installing burners and boilers today, moving over to heat pumps and electric heating. But we also see much broader capabilities to reskill and upskill many of these workers and use their existing skill sets today to support the growth in clean energy. And we estimate around 50% of the jobs at risk in our net zero scenario are able to quickly redeploy with a moderate amount of retraining into clean energy sectors. Of course, this varies drastically by technology and also by region. When looking at oil and gas, we see that the number of jobs created in parallel sectors and occupations needed in biofuels, CCUS, hydrogen, offshore wind, and geothermal, that this job growth more than offsets the job declines in oil and gas in our 1.5 degree scenario. But when we turn our attention to emerging market and developing economies, where we have a high level of informal workers in coal mining today, this becomes a more difficult and acute transition risk. And this needs to be considered in the broader task that these economies have to upskill and formalize their workforce today. But I think overall the message is clear that across any of the IEA scenarios, we see faster growth in employment, energy employment, as the energy transition accelerates. And this should be one of the opportunities that policymakers are heralding and being able to mobilize more support for clean energy transitions, as this presents a lot of opportunities, particularly to bring blue-collar workers into higher-paying jobs going forward. And the IEA is dedicating a lot more work and research into the different types of policy mechanisms that make sure that the job creation here is both quality jobs, brings in more diverse workers and is more inclusive, and also is able to target the clean energy communities that are most at risk in the transition. And we're very fortunate today to be joined by great speakers from across the world who are on the front lines of some of this challenge and thinking about these policies that can best make the transition people-centered and improve outcomes for workers and improve livelihoods. So with that, I'll turn it back to Brian Motherway to introduce our panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you, Lara. Faster growth in employment as the clean energy transition accelerates. And it's really great to have these data sets. I know they really matter to governments and to employees and to stakeholders around the world to really be able to understand, first of all, the good news in terms of the acceleration in clean energy transitions and the good news in terms of job creation, but also the issues governments and other decision makers face in terms of presenting those opportunities and making sure the right people benefit in terms of protecting those who may be in danger of losing their jobs in certain fields, but also making sure that marginalised and poorer communities benefits from the opportunities, but also making sure that workforces of the future have the skills and opportunities they need. And as we have heard from Dan and Lara, it's not just about top-down statistics when we talk about jobs and skills, because we're talking about people, and therefore details matter and local details matter. And that's why it's really great to have some speakers from around the world who can bring us some of those local details, because they are working, as Dan said, at the forefront of this field to really understand how we can bring the benefits of clean energy job opportunities to people. And so I'm delighted to go now to our speakers, and the first of those is Bethany Jones, who is the Director of the Office of Energy Jobs at the Department of Energy in the United States. Bethany, thank you very much for joining us, and it's great to start with you, because for many people, when we think about jobs and inclusivity and their connections to clean energy, we think of the Inflation Reduction Act, which has done so many interesting things to connect labour with the incentives of the Inflation Reduction Act. So maybe you could tell us really briefly, if you could please, about some of your thinking in making those labour and clean energy links as you designed the IRA, please.
Yeah, that's so great. I hope you can hear me. I'm having some technical difficulties and can't join by video.
Bethany, thanks for being
with us. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. So thanks so much for having us here. It's really exciting to see the launch of the second World Energy Employment Report. These insights and reports like these, and we do one too in the US, really provide vital information to shape and inform energy policy, as you just said with the Inflation Reduction Act. Last year, in 2022, there were 8.1 million energy jobs in the United States, and we see clean energy jobs growing at a faster rate than energy jobs generally. Clean energy jobs grew at 3.8% last year, compared to energy jobs, which grew at 3.1%, higher than the overall growth in the economy. So the energy sector is growing, the clean energy sector is growing faster. And right now, across the United States, 40% of the energy jobs are in the clean energy sector, which are those jobs or those industries or technologies aligned with a net zero future. And the reason that we have this data is because since 2016, the Department of Energy has been publishing an annual U.S. energy and employment report. And this uses both existing government data sets and a survey of energy employers, 35,000 energy employers across the U.S., to paint a picture of what employment in the energy sector looks like and what key trends are, geographic distribution of jobs by technology. And we cover 5 major sectors of the energy system. First, electric power generation, looking across different generation technologies. We look at transmission, distribution, and storage. We look at fuels. We look at energy efficiency, and we also look at motor vehicles. And across all of these sectors, we're looking at both manufacturing and the construction of new energy sites, and then ongoing operations and maintenance. So the data that we have, we look at nationally, but also by state across all 50 states and 2 territories. And importantly, for informing policymaking, we look at this data by county. And so we can see what are the geographic disparities or the geographic nuance or just trends where certain regions that have been heavily invested in fossil fuels, how are they faring in the energy transition? It provides us information on how to account for particular vulnerabilities as we design and shape climate policy. And we saw this in particular over the past few years with the passage of 3 bills. First, the bipartisan infrastructure law, which invests just for the Department of Energy alone, $62 billion to get new clean energy technologies up to the point of commercial viability. It also informs the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides quite generous incentives to the private sector to invest in clean energy and clean energy supply chains in the US. And then the CHIPS and Science Act was the third part of this suite of climate and energy bills that we saw passed last year. And again, because of that geographic granularity, members of Congress can see the interests of their constituents in the energy transition, and it helps shape and inform policy. So it's been really effective for the United States to have this data. I know we're helping our Department of State. The Foreign Ministry is helping the government of Indonesia develop a report, an Indonesian version of the Energy and Employment Report. The World Energy Report clearly provides really important trends globally. Having this data at hand is just, it's so important for helping us understand, again, as was said earlier, how people are both affected by the transition, but also where workforce availability is and needs to grow in order to ensure and accelerate a successful energy transition. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Bethany. And you know, if you tell the IEA about the importance of collecting data, we're going to absolutely agree with you. And it's great to hear the work the US is doing, not just in the US, but internationally as well. And I really do agree the importance of understanding these issues at a detailed and granular level. So thank you for sharing that perspective. Let's go now to another exemplar looking at the future of clean energy and jobs, and in particular preparing the skills of the future. And that's India, and particularly the National Skill Development Corporation. I'm delighted that we're joined by the Director of Strategy in the NSTC, Manish Mishra. So, Manish, it's great to have you with us. And maybe you could tell us a bit about the work that the NSTC is doing to prepare the skilled workers for the future of clean energy in India.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. I was listening with rapt attention to some of the findings of the report this year, and it is very much in line with what we have been thinking as to how this whole energy scenario is developing, and how the green energy related jobs are going to outpace the fossil fuel related jobs over time. And this is one anticipation that we have been working with. Thanks for providing solid data to support that kind of a hypothesis. I think we are very much on track as far as our efforts to develop a skilled manpower for this kind of an economy. We at NSTC are the apex body for skill development in the country. We work with the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, which happens to be the nodal ministry for all skill development efforts in the country. In order to understand the nuances of the green energy and the green economy, amongst many sector skill councils that we have set up, there's one around the green jobs sector skill council, and which continuously monitors the trends and also the requirement of the manpower, does a lot of anticipation about the manpower in the sector, and is our body which spearheads all the efforts that we do in development of the manpower for this particular sector. They came out with a report recently, and their estimation is that India might actually lose 3 to 3.5% of its GDP over years if we don't prepare the manpower, which are attuned to the green economy or the new energy sector over a period of time. As we all know, India's nationally determined contribution commitments talk about reducing the emission to the degree of 30 to 35%, and also about 45% of its overall energy should actually come from the non-fossil fuel sources, which means a lot given the size of the country. And this would primarily mean that we not only need to, number one, reduce emission, we also need to improve the efficiency of our systems across technologies. And then we also need to develop solutions that would work at scale. So when we look at all these, we say that right from the generation to the transmission and distribution, we also need to look at the application of the energy, because uh, it's very important for us to look at the entire apparatus and equipment ecosystem that we develop in order to make the maximum and the most efficient use of energy that we have at our disposal. And in order to do all this, we need a manpower which is conversant with this kind of a requirement. And for that, I think these kind of reports are very, very handy. Um, India, as you know, enjoys significant demographic advantage, and it can actually be the supplier of the manpower to the world. As the Prime Minister of India says, that India can actually become the skilled manpower capital to the world. And we have a lot of mobility and migration arrangements with many countries, and we are actually sending a lot of skilled manpower to various parts of the world. I think energy also India can provide that kind of a solution, but our domestic requirements are so huge that we need to, one, make a very correct estimation of what is going to happen over a period of time in order to prepare our systems and equip our skilling and education ecosystem in a manner in which we can uh, train people in very large numbers. Um, our college system is such that despite 28% of GER, or the gross enrollment ratio, we still have uh, close to 4 to 4.5 crore people who are enrolled for the undergraduate and postgraduate programs. And they can actually be a very, very important source if we bring in skill training and we can embed it or integrate it as part of our education system. For this, we need to develop that kind of a training and skilling ecosystem, and this is something that we are working towards. NSDC, the National Skill Development Corporation, runs the largest flagship program of skilling in the country, and till date we would have trained close to 1.5 crore people. And in future, we are going to train much more. And with this recently announced, the new education policy of the country also provides the right kind of a framework and impetus to build skills as part of the regular education. And we see a huge opportunity of bringing this new economy, this new green economy related programs as part of the educational curricula. The areas that we see there could be a great possibility within the green economy sector are waste management. We also see solar energy as one of the important sectors where a lot of jobs will come up. Sustainable textiles and the sustainable construction, again, there's going to be a huge source of employment, and we need to prepare people for that. But having said that, we should also keep an eye on how this is going to impact those who are already part of the workforce, and especially whose jobs and employments are actually dependent upon the fossil fuel uh, uh, related sectors, and how are those going to be impacted, and how do we transition them smoothly as possible from the existing employment to the new employment. And that is where this entire framework is also needed, and what can possibly be done in order to ensure that there's a just transition. So not only that we want to create this manpower which is ready to embrace future and develop capabilities in those areas, but also in order to make sure that this whole transition is equitable and just for people. We need to look at building solutions for the ones who are going to be affected adversely because of all this. While the report says that the total number of jobs created as part of the green economy is going to not only outpace but also outnumber the jobs lost. But how do we train and equip people in the existing fossil fuel related sectors and make them ready for the new jobs is also a challenge that we are looking at. And therefore, Government of India, in addition to the fresh skilling, is also talking a lot about the reskilling and upskilling of the current workforce. And that is where we would actually benefit from reports like these and that's precisely why we wanted to work very closely with the IEA and some of the other agencies who are working in this sector in order to understand this overall requirement sector-wise, geography-wise, and technology-wise better in order to develop policies and strategies to ensure that we tap into this opportunity and also to handle this challenge properly. Thanks for this opportunity, Sam, and thank you very much.
No, thank you indeed. What NSCC is doing is really impressive, and the framing of the opportunity for India, but also the cost of not moving quickly to prepare the workforce of the future is really important and really useful to us. So thank you for those remarks. And we've two more speakers, so I'll ask them both to be brief. We really want to hear from you. You have really important perspectives. And let's go immediately now to Corey Anderson, who's the Director of Sustainable Jobs in Energy Systems at Natural Resources Canada. So Corey, thank you for joining us. I'm glad you're with us because Canada is known as a leader in just transitions in many areas. So maybe you could say a few words about what you're doing in relation to skills and workforces in the clean energy space, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad to be here today. I think this is a really important report, and it's critical as we are working to reduce emissions across the energy sector that we're really aware of and anticipate the workforce that will be needed because, as Laura said, that's the engine of the economy. So we need to make sure that our workers are supported and prepared. And we see great opportunity in the clean economy, but there are also challenges and things we need to think about in terms of preparing the workforce. And we know that workers will need skills training in some cases, skills upskilling and training. We know that new jobs that will be created won't all be in the same locations where jobs are lost. And we know that some communities are dependent on a single resource or industry that may not be in demand in the future. We know that we'll need many more workers in sectors where we in Canada are already facing labor shortages, which includes the skilled trades. And I did note the focus on the skilled trades in the presentation earlier. So while we see great opportunities, we can't ignore that there's work that we need to do to ensure that we can realize this potential. And in Canada, we are very focused on seizing the significant opportunities that are inherent in the transition to a low carbon economy. And we see many high quality, good paying jobs that will emerge from that shift, including in things like clean hydrogen, critical minerals, green vehicle manufacturing, wind and solar, and small modular nuclear reactors. We also recognize that many opportunities will arise from the decarbonization in the oil and gas sector, which is a big sector in Canada, including through carbon capture and storage. So we are doing this through what we call the Sustainable Jobs approach, and that's really an initiative that comes out of our international just transition commitments and is focused on what we're transitioning to. So fostering that shift to low carbon economic growth while supporting workers and communities to thrive. So in February of this year, our government released an interim sustainable jobs plan, and that was followed by the introduction of sustainable jobs legislation in June to create a framework for accountability, engagement, and transparency, and to ensure continued action over time. So in Canada, we consider a sustainable job to be any job that's compatible with Canada's path to a net zero emissions economy and a climate resilient future. And the term also reflects the ILO concept of decent work, including well-paying, high-quality jobs with elements like job security and social protection. Our interim plan outlined 10 key action areas, and I'm happy to say many of those align with the findings in the World Energy Employment Report, such as advancing funding for skills development, motivating investors and industry leadership to support workers, and improving labor market data collection, tracking, and analysis. So we're really seeking to create a holistic understanding of the impacts of the energy transition, address barriers in innovative ways while taking advantage of the opportunities that the transition presents in every region of Canada and for every Canadian worker. The Sustainable Jobs Act, if passed, will commit us to publish a new action plan every 5 years, beginning in 2025, that will set out measures and milestones that will support Canada's approach to sustainable jobs. And these action plans will be informed by evidence, including insights that we learn from other jurisdictions, from the IEA and other international organizations working in this space, and from stakeholders and partners that we will be engaging in a robust way through our engagement framework. So in addition to the work that we're doing domestically, we're also engaged in work to create a people-centered energy transition in our multilateral engagement. In 2021, we helped launch the Clean Energy Ministerial's Empowering People initiative to highlight critical socioeconomic elements of the energy transition, to empower people and promote just and equitable transitions by advancing skills, inclusivity, and workforce development. So the Empowering People initiative works with governments and other stakeholders, including the IEA, to promote equity and inclusivity while leveraging other initiatives that could benefit from a greater emphasis on the human aspects of the shift to a low-carbon economy. Last year, the Empowering People initiative partnered with the IEA to build on the work of the IEA's Global Commission on People-Centered Clean Energy Transitions. We released a joint report to support countries interested in adopting the Commission's recommendations and committing to their implementation, with the goal to ensure all workers can benefit from new job opportunities in the clean energy future. And I'm pleased to say that 4 Canadian examples were featured as case studies within the report, underscoring our commitment to a people-centered transition. So we look forward to continuing to work with the IEA to build on these efforts and ensure that we work towards a common evidence-driven, people-centered approach to a clean energy workforce. And I will stop there.
Thank you very much indeed, Corey. Congratulations on those many initiatives. And I must say it's a pleasure and a privilege for us in the IEA to be able to work with you in the Empowering People initiative and in many other strands of your work in this in so many areas. So thank you very much. Now, colleagues, as Lara said earlier, one really important facet that we see in the IEA is giving a voice to unions around the world as we talk about clean energy and jobs. So it's very fitting that the last perspective we hear in our discussions today is a union perspective. And so I'm delighted to welcome Bartumelo Malete, who is the Social Development Policy Coordinator at the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU. So Bartumelo, thank you for joining us and for sharing your perspectives. So we are a little tight of time, as we always are at these events, but really it's my pleasure to give the floor to you to hear the union perspective on these issues. Over to you, Bartumelo.
Sure, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. We're quite thrilled to be part of this engagement. I think from a union perspective, we need to be clear that our main and core concern, as well as mandate, is to ensure that we limit any job losses. With that said, I mean, the summary, the executive summary speaks about the development of the energy sector and how there will be additional jobs that will be created. While this is very exciting for unions in the means that work will be created, we're faced with various challenges when it comes to the energy sector. We have a huge percentage of energy poverty and crisis in the sector, and it's going to be important that in the investment of this clean energy that we are thinking about how it is that we're creating enough jobs. This is the concern of the union, creating enough jobs that are decent across all the alternative energy and renewable energy means to ensure that no one worker in this transition is left behind. So we need to be able to track the correct skills and jobs plans for workers. We need to be very intentional about this, as this is the only way in which workers are going to be able to transition justly and equitably. the core fundamental of this just transition when it comes to workers is the importance of skills. And I'm so glad that the report has raised the importance of skills and how we're going to ensure and enable that the just transition is implemented through sufficient reskilling, upskilling, and skilling of workers. The importance of education and training needs to be emphasized quite strongly, and I think the report does that. When COSATU articulates a just transition, we speak about the importance of education and training that is demand-driven and sector-specific when it comes to clean energy production and clean energy generation. We are, especially in the context of the Global South, there's going to be a huge need for technology transfer and for actual jobs to be profiled while we are in parallel transitioning and developing new technologies. We need to make sure that we have actual jobs that are planned and in parallel with that transition of technology. The executive summary gives a great analysis on the energy sector. However, I think the reality is that in the global north and the global south are not the same. And the emphasis of technology transfer from my perspective, and especially from a global south-based union, is to ensure that we have the sufficient investment in these technologies, not only internationally, but also domestically, to allow for the sector to actually grow. So the growth of the renewable energy sector is depicted as influencing quite strongly the employment rate, and we're quite really looking forward to that. But we need to ensure that we also think about the domestic challenges that we may face. In the perspective of South Africa, the sectors that we have looked at, or the parts of the sectors we have looked at quite strongly, is in construction, manufacturing, solar, PVs, as well as EVs, and to some extent green hydrogen. So COSATU projects that the core enabler of these sectors to actually flourish will be in the localization of these sectors, in ensuring that there's sufficient investment domestically, but also there are sufficient skills, sufficient jobs, and sufficient means to which to participate in the new low carbon economy. The role of small businesses is very important in ensuring that there's sufficient job creation in COSATU's perspective, but also the issue of ownership, especially worker ownership when it comes to renewable energy, is going to be quite important. So in conclusion, I just would like to also emphasize just the importance of investment in skills, education, training, in social protection measures, because we do know that there will be job losses, and that workers need to be sufficiently protected from any adversity that may be driven by this transition. An important part of it will be a focus on gender and youth. But just essentially, unions are looking in South Africa, looking for this transition to be people-led, like the report has articulated, but also for it to have policies in place that prevent any form of privatization that would encourage the loss of the state's power in relation to ensuring that energy provision and energy poverty is addressed sufficiently. Noting that privatization, especially in the context of South Africa, a complete privatization would mean that the provisions of energy will not be actually provided across the majority of people who are mostly workers and from low-income households. So mine would be just to congratulate you on this report, and we're looking forward to also taking some learnings from the reports to ensure that we further strengthen our work and our perspective in relation to energy and employment in energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bartomelo, and thank you for giving that broader social context that we have to remember we're working in on the specific issues for South Africa, but also the global South, and some key points there around gender and inclusivity, the role of youth, technology transfer, localization. Really important that we hear those points. And let me commend again the role of the leadership that COSATU shows, not just in South Africa, but globally. And I must say it's an honor for us to have COSATU's President Losi as a co-chair of the IEA's Clean Energy Labour Council. So thank you very much for joining us today. And let me thank Bethany, Manish, Corey and Bertamello for joining us. It's been really great for us to hear your rich perspectives, to add to the rich data we've heard from my colleagues Lara and Daniel in presenting the second World Energy Employment Report. I did say at the start we'd take some questions. Unfortunately, time is upon us, but we have gathered the questions you sent us. We do encourage you to get in touch and we will follow up, so we do want to hear from you. This is an important and growing area of focus for the IEA, so we do encourage you to engage with us on this topic and know that it will be the subject of future reports and events. And in fact, we do have an event just tomorrow looking at the social impacts of clean energy transport policies, and you can find details of that on our website. So let me thank all of the colleagues who have joined us today, particularly Lara and Dan and all of the colleagues who prepared this excellent report that is launched today and is now available freely on our website. And with that, I will close today's event. Thank you very much.